The morning air at the exclusive Metrobrook Hills playground was usually a symphony of pampered children's laughter and polite, hushed gossip among their mothers. But on this day, the air was cut by a sound as sharp as glass. "My God, get your daughter away from that man right now." Patricia Whitmore's voice, as brittle and perfect as her appearance, pierced the atmosphere. Her perfectly manicured fingernails, painted a shade of elegant periwinkle, pointed directly at Marcus Thompson, a man in a faded navy uniform. He was crouching next to a little girl, 7-year-old Emma Richardson, whose blonde hair caught the sunlight. Emma had just uttered a single word that shattered 3 years of silence. "Hello." Emma's mother, billionaire Victoria Richardson, froze. The sound of her daughter's voice was a physical jolt, a current of pure shock and disbelief. She had spent a fortune and countless hours with the best specialists in the world to hear that word again. But it had come from a complete stranger. The man she and the other mothers had silently agreed was little more than a part of the landscape, the hired landscaper. Patricia, seizing the moment, lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, but it still dripped with condescension. "Victoria, you can't let your daughter interact with people like that, especially here in our playground. What kind of example are you setting?" Marcus stood slowly, his hands still smudged with dark earth from the garden beds he tended. He met Victoria's eyes, and she was struck by the raw quiet she saw there. It wasn't anger or shame or even embarrassment. It was an unshakable calm, the kind that only comes from having faced far worse. It was the calmness of a man who knew his own worth, regardless of what others saw. "Mommy, he heard me?" Emma whispered, her little voice still weak from disuse but crystal clear. "He really heard me." Victoria swallowed hard. She, as CEO of Richardson Tech, was a master of logistics and data. She had a team of brilliant minds at her disposal, experts who had invested millions in communication research. Yet a simple gardener had accomplished in 2 minutes what years of advanced therapy had failed to do. "Emma, come here now," Patricia ordered, holding out her hand impatiently. "Your mother needs to take you home." But Emma didn't move. Her eyes remained fixed on Marcus, who was now putting his gardening tools away in a worn wooden box. "Thank you," Emma said again, this time louder. Marcus offered a kind smile and nodded respectfully. "It was a pleasure to meet you, little Emma. Keep using that beautiful voice." He turned to Victoria with an almost imperceptible nod. "Have a good day, Mrs. Richardson." As he walked away, pushing his tool cart, Victoria's eyes followed him. She noticed, for the first time, the deep scars running down his arms and the slight limp in his left leg. There was a story in those imperfections, a gravity to his presence that transcended the simple uniform of a gardener. "These people always try to take advantage of families like ours," Patricia said, shaking her head disapprovingly. "I bet he's already planning some kind of scam or blackmail." But Victoria couldn't take her eyes off Marcus as he disappeared through the back gate. Emma had spoken. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, her daughter had used her voice, and not with a specialist, but with a man whom the neighborhood treated as invisible. In that moment, Victoria realized 2 things with startling clarity. Her daughter's breakthrough was a profound mystery, and Marcus Thompson was harboring secrets far greater than anyone could imagine. The following Monday, Marcus Thompson arrived at work 45 minutes before opening time, a habit ingrained from years of military discipline. He carried his worn toolbox and a thermos of black coffee. What he didn't expect was the warning letter stuck to the back gate of the condominium. "Inappropriate behavior with minors. Violation of professional conduct rules. Last warning before dismissal." The letter was signed by Patricia Whitmore. Marcus folded the paper calmly and slipped it into his pocket. At 35, after 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic and years spent battling a system that saw his injured leg as a liability, he knew the script well. But this time, the stakes were different. "Marcus!" Emma's voice cut through the morning air. The little girl ran across the lawn toward him, completely ignoring Patricia's angry shouts. "Emma Richardson, come back here right now." Patricia's voice was a furious hiss. "How many times do I have to tell you not to talk to the staff?" Marcus knelt down to Emma's height, Good morning, little one. How are you today? Very well. Last night I told Mom all about you, and she was very happy I did. Emma spoke quickly, as if to make up for 3 years of silence. She said you must be a very special person. Patricia was by their side in an instant, her face flushed with indignation. This is unacceptable. You are deliberately disobeying the rules of the condominium by interacting with the residents. She pointed a finger at Marcus, then turned to Emma. And you, young lady, are being extremely rude by ignoring direct instructions. But he's my friend, Emma said simply, taking Marcus's hand. Patricia grew even more furious. Friends? What nonsense! You have no idea where this man came from, what kind of life he's had, what kind of person he really is. Marcus stood slowly, his grip on Emma's hand firm but gentle. You're right, Mrs. Patricia. Miss Emma doesn't know anything about me. His eyes met hers, and a disturbing calm returned. Just as you don't. Something in his tone, an unexpected authority, made Patricia hesitate. It was then that Victoria Richardson arrived, her expression difficult to read. In the last 48 hours, she had slept only a few hours, obsessed with finding out more about the man who had made her daughter talk. She knew the statistics. Marcus had defied them all. Good morning, Marcus, Victoria said, completely ignoring Patricia's presence. Emma won't stop talking about you. Mommy, look. Emma let go of Marcus's hand and ran a few steps. He taught me that when you run in the garden, you have to step on the soft grass, not the hard grass, because the hard grass is hurting. Victoria watched Marcus with growing curiosity. Do you know about botany? A little, Marcus replied modestly. Gardening helps me stay calm. You can't allow this, Victoria, Patricia interrupted, exasperated. The rules of the condominium are clear. Employees are not to fraternize with residents. Patricia, Victoria said coldly. Emma hadn't spoken in 3 years. If Marcus has been able to help her, I not only allow this interaction, I encourage it. Patricia's face went pale. You don't understand. People like him always have ulterior motives. He's probably already planning some kind of extortion. Marcus remained silent, but Victoria noticed how his muscles tensed slightly, like a soldier preparing for a confrontation. She then looked closer, past the humble uniform. She saw the constant scanning of the area, the way he catalogued every exit, every movement, and the scar on his neck that barely showed above his shirt collar. He was precise and controlled, like someone who had been under pressure his entire life. Marcus, Victoria said, her voice a calm probe, have you worked with children before? What kind of question is that? He's a gardener, Patricia snorted, but Marcus looked directly at Victoria, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something in his eyes that made her swallow hard. Recognition. It was as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. I've worked with many people who needed to find their voice, he replied enigmatically. In that instant, Victoria knew 2 things with absolute certainty. Marcus Thompson was not a simple gardener, and Patricia Whitmore had just made a very powerful enemy. That same afternoon, Marcus Thompson did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He placed a phone call to Washington, D.C. The small apartment he shared with 2 other veterans was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner. His hands, still stained with earth from his morning work, trembled slightly as he held the phone. This is Dr. Marcus Thompson. I need my complete military records. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Marcus? My God, son, where have you been? We've been trying to reach you since you left the hospital. You just disappeared. Marcus looked out the window at the anonymous cityscape. The question was a wound he hadn't allowed to heal. I've been finding myself, Colonel, but now I need to prove who I really am. Job problems, discrimination, something like that. He took a deep, steadying breath. I need all my medical certificates, decorations, and especially the report from the mission in Kandahar. You know the one. The silence on the line was heavy with shared memory. Marcus, you saved 17 Afghan children from that bombed hospital. You performed emergency surgery without anesthesia for 14 hours straight while the place was under attack. You're a decorated war hero and one of the best surgeons this nation has ever had. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped Marcus's lips. I don't feel that way when someone looks at me and sees just a troublesome black gardener. The colonel's sigh was a familiar sound of weary resignation. I'll email everything today. And Marcus, it's time you remembered who you really are. Meanwhile, at the Meadowbrook Hills condominium, Patricia Whitmore was having the most important meeting of her career as president of the Residents Association. Seated in her immaculate living room, surrounded by 5 other women from the local elite, she laid out her plan with the confidence of someone who had never faced real opposition. Ladies, we need to understand the gravity of the situation, Patricia declared, pouring tea into Chinese porcelain cups. We have a disruptive element infiltrating our community, and now Victoria Richardson, our most influential neighbor, is defending this individual. Margaret Thornton, the mayor's wife, shook her head disapprovingly. Patricia, have you seen the way he looks at women? There's something definitely suspicious about his behavior with the children. Exactly. Patricia tapped her spoon on the cup emphatically. And Victoria is blinded by her own family problems. That girl of hers is, well, different. It's only natural that Victoria would cling to anyone who shows an interest in her. Catherine Blackwell, heiress to an oil fortune, laughed dismissively. People like him always know exactly how to manipulate vulnerable situations. I bet he's already identified Victoria as a target because of her daughter's condition. We need to document everything, Patricia continued, picking up a notepad. Every interaction he has with the children, every time he leaves the staff area, every inappropriate word. I'll even hire a private investigator if necessary. What none of them knew was that Marcus Thompson had grown up in situations where his life depended on observing every detail, every movement, every word whispered with malicious intent. His 3 tours in Afghanistan had not only refined his surgical skills, they had honed his strategic and survival abilities into something lethal. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work carrying something different besides his tools. A small, discreet digital recorder and a smartphone that Victoria had purposely forgotten in the garden the night before, after programming it to automatically record conversations. Good morning, Marcus, Emma said, running toward him as had become routine. But today her mother accompanied her with a determined expression. Marcus, I need to talk to you, Victoria said, completely ignoring the disapproving glances of the other mothers passing by. Emma told me that you know a lot about medicinal plants. How does one learn such things working as a gardener? Marcus smiled, but his eyes remained alert, constantly assessing his surroundings. Knowledge is like a seed, Mrs. Richardson. It can grow in any soil, regardless of where it was originally planted. At that moment, Patricia appeared, marching through the garden with 2 other women, one of whom carried a briefcase and the other a camera. Victoria, I need to officially document this further breach of protocol, Patricia announced, her voice loud enough to draw attention. Employees are not to fraternize with residents, especially not in this intimate and inappropriate manner. Marcus straightened slowly, and Victoria noticed for the first time how different he looked when he assumed his full posture. He seemed taller, more imposing, with a natural authority that completely contradicted the humble gardener everyone thought they knew. Mrs. Whitmore, Marcus said calmly, his voice no longer that of an employee, but of an equal. May I ask what specific protocol I am violating by speaking politely to a resident who addressed me? Patricia hesitated for a moment, clearly surprised by his impeccable articulation and professional tone. You know very well that you shouldn't be interacting in this way with people like Mrs. Richardson and her daughter. People like what, exactly? Marcus finished, his voice still calm, but with an intensity that made Patricia take a step back. Could you be more specific about what kind of people those are, please? Victoria watched in fascination as Marcus, with just 2 direct questions, had put Patricia in a position where any answer would reveal the exact prejudice she was trying to disguise as professional concern. It's not about types of people, Patricia stammered, realizing she had fallen into a verbal trap. It's about maintaining order and the established rules. I see, Marcus nodded respectfully. And are these rules documented anywhere? I would very much like to review them to ensure that I am complying with all protocols properly. That was when Patricia, frustrated and publicly humiliated, made the mistake that would seal her fate. Listen here, she hissed, lowering her voice, but not enough to prevent Victoria's strategically positioned smartphone from picking up every poisonous word. People like you can fool some naive people, but I know exactly what you are and what you're trying to do here. Marcus smiled then, and Victoria felt a chill when she realized it wasn't a smile of submission or embarrassment. It was the smile of a soldier who had just been given exactly the ammunition he needed for a war Patricia didn't even know she was fighting. 48 hours later, Patricia Whitmore called an emergency meeting of the Residents Association. The condominium's event hall was packed. 23 families, including Victoria Richardson, who arrived accompanied by Emma and carrying a sleek leather briefcase. Marcus smiled discreetly when he saw it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia began, her voice strained with artificial authority, "I have called this meeting to address an extremely serious security issue. We have an individual in our community who poses a potential threat to our families." Marcus sat in the back row, still wearing his gardener's uniform, but there was a quiet, controlled power to his posture. His shoulders were straight, his eyes alert, scanning the room with the precision of someone accustomed to assessing threats in seconds. "Over the past week," Patricia continued, "I have documented multiple protocol violations involving gardener Marcus Thompson. Inappropriate interactions with minors, disregard for rules of conduct, and behavior that we consider suspicious." Margaret Thornton, the mayor's wife, stood up, brandishing a folder. "We hired a private investigator to check this individual's background. What we found is disturbing. Clean criminal record, but a history of psychological problems related to military service." Catherine Blackwell added with a malicious grin, "PTSD, permanent injuries, multiple psychiatric hospitalizations. Clearly unstable." Victoria watched Marcus carefully. She expected to see anger, humiliation, or at least discomfort. Instead, he looked amused, like someone watching a bad play he already knew the ending to. "I move," Patricia announced dramatically, "for the immediate dismissal and permanent banishment of Marcus Thompson from this property." 17 hands shot up immediately. It was then that Marcus slowly rose to his feet. The silence in the hall was instant and heavy. "May I ask a question before the final vote?" His voice had changed completely. It was no longer the humble, careful speech of a gardener. It was the voice of command, accustomed to ordering life-and-death situations. Patricia hesitated, clearly irritated by the interruption. "You have no right to speak at this meeting. You are only an employee." "I understand," Marcus nodded respectfully, "but as the discussion involves me, I thought it would be fair to allow me to clarify some incorrect information that has been presented." He walked calmly to the front of the hall, and Victoria noticed that his limp had all but disappeared. Each step was deliberate, controlled, and authoritative. "First," Marcus said, removing a thick envelope from his pocket, "I would like to clarify my so-called clean criminal record." He opened the envelope and removed a series of official documents. "Dr. Marcus Thompson, combat surgeon, United States Army." He read a list that sent shockwaves through the room. 2 Bronze Stars for valor in combat, a Military Medical Medal of Honor. He paused, allowing the weight of the words to settle. "And a presidential citation for exceptional service to the nation." The silence in the hall became suffocating. "During my last tour of duty in Afghanistan, I performed 17 emergency surgeries on children wounded during a bombing raid, working 14 hours straight under enemy fire. I saved every one of them." Patricia paled visibly. That doesn't change the fact that you're an opportunistic." "Oh, yes," Marcus interrupted her gently, removing a small digital recorder from his other pocket. "The opportunism? I'd love to discuss that." He pressed play, and Patricia's voice filled the room with crystal clarity. "These people always try to take advantage of families like ours. I bet he's already planning some kind of scam or blackmail. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Marcus continued. And here we have another interesting conversation. He pressed another button. Margaret Thornton's voice echoed. Patricia, have you seen the way he looks at women? There's definitely something suspicious about his behavior around children. Margaret's face turned beet red. But my favorite, Marcus said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, is this one here. Catherine Blackwell's voice filled the silence. People like him always know exactly how to manipulate vulnerable situations. I bet he's already identified Victoria as a target because of her daughter's condition. Victoria stood up abruptly, her expression a mixture of fury and determination. Marcus, may I? He nodded and handed her the microphone. For the past 5 days, Victoria began, her voice controlled but laden with authority. I have been closely observing the interactions between Marcus and my daughter. Emma hadn't spoken in 3 years. 3 years. She looked directly at Patricia. I spent over $500,000 on treatments, therapies, and specialists. Within 2 minutes of talking to Marcus, my daughter said her first word. Since then, she hasn't stopped talking, laughing, and playing. He gave me my daughter back. Victoria opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. So I did my own investigation. Dr. Marcus Thompson isn't just a war hero. He's a specialist in child trauma therapy, a graduate of Johns Hopkins University. He worked for 5 years at Baltimore's leading pediatric hospital before enlisting. Patricia tried to interrupt, but Victoria continued relentlessly. His psychological instability consisted of 3 months of voluntary therapy to deal with the loss of his best friend in combat, something any decent person would do. He has never had a single psychiatric hospitalization. Marcus took the microphone again. Now, about my ulterior motives. I work as a gardener because no clinic or hospital in this city would hire me. Not because I'm unqualified. I have the credentials to run the pediatric department at any hospital in the country, but because he looked directly at Patricia. People like you would rather see the color of my skin than my diplomas. The silence was so absolute that the sound of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Victoria Richardson offered me a position yesterday as Director of Human Development at her company with a salary of $250,000 a year. I'll start on Monday. Patricia was practically shaking with anger and humiliation. That's a trap. You planned all this. Patricia, Marcus said calmly. The only thing I planned was to be kind to a child who needed help. Everything else was a consequence of the choices you made. He turned to face the entire assembly. Every recording you've heard today was made in public areas of this condominium. Every prejudiced word, every malicious assumption, every attempt to humiliate me because of the color of my skin or my status as a veteran. All documented. Victoria stood up again. As the new legal advisor to this community, I am informing you that Patricia Whitmore, Margaret Thornton, and Catherine Blackwell are being sued for racial discrimination, defamation, and harassment. The recordings will be turned over to the district attorney's office later today. Patricia's face was now completely livid. You can't do that. We are respected members of this community. You were, Marcus corrected gently. And about my resignation. He smiled genuinely for the first time since he had met these women. I just bought the penthouse in Building 5. We'll be neighbors. At that moment, as Patricia Whitmore realized that she had not only lost her position of power but turned her own arrogance into the tool of her destruction, one question hung in the air. Would people capable of such prejudice ever learn any lessons from such a public humiliation? 6 months later, Dr. Marcus Thompson sat in his office on the 23rd floor of Richardson Tech, reviewing proposals for the company's new social inclusion program. Through the panoramic window, he could see the Meadowbrook Hills condominium, now a very different view from his former perspective. Dr. Thompson, his assistant, appeared at the door. The city council meeting is confirmed for 3 o'clock. They want to discuss expanding the program to other communities. Marcus nodded, adjusting his custom-tailored tie. In 6 months, The assisted therapy program he had developed had transformed the lives of more than 200 children with communication disorders. The man who had once been rejected from a dozen job interviews because of his color and veteran status was now invited to speak at universities across the country. Across town, Patricia Whitmore signed the final divorce papers at a small law office. Her husband had discovered the recordings through the court case and decided he no longer wanted to be associated with that kind of person. Alimony will be $1,200 a month, the lawyer informed her. And the apartment in Meadowbrook Hills will go to your ex-husband. Patricia swallowed hard. From president of the Homeowners Association to a tenant in a small apartment in the suburbs, her fall had happened with the speed of a public trial. Margaret Thornton was no better off. When the recordings were leaked, her husband lost his re-election bid for mayor by a humiliating margin. Catherine Blackwell saw her investments withdrawn due to corporate image issues. Meanwhile, at the Meadowbrook Hills playground, now renamed Dr. Marcus Thompson Park by unanimous vote of the new residents, Emma Richardson ran freely, chatting animatedly with other children about her plans for the future. "When I grow up, I'm going to be a doctor like Uncle Marcus," she declared to Victoria, who watched with tears of joy in her eyes. Marcus arrived at the park that late afternoon, as he did every Friday. No longer pushing a tool cart, he drove up in a BMW and parked next to Victoria's car. "How was the council meeting today?" Victoria asked as they watched Emma play. "They approved the expansion to 5 cities," Marcus smiled. "And they offered me a permanent seat on the Public Health Committee." Victoria nodded, still impressed. "You know, you changed not only Emma's life, but mine too. You taught me to see beyond appearances." Marcus watched a new family arrive at the park, a black father with his young son, clearly nervous in such an elegant setting. Without hesitation, he walked over to them. "First time here?" he asked the man kindly. "Yes, sir. My wife got a job at Richardson Tech and we moved into the apartment over there." The man pointed shyly to one of the buildings. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Marcus smiled, extending his hand. "I'm Marcus Thompson. I live in the penthouse of Building 5. If you ever need anything, you can count on me." Later, as they walked back home, Victoria commented, "You know, you could have just accepted her apology and moved on, right?" Marcus stopped and looked at her seriously. "Victoria, it wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure what happened to me didn't happen to anyone else." Patricia and the others learned that judging people by their appearance has real consequences. Emma ran up to them, still full of energy. "Uncle Marcus, are you coming to my recital at school next week?" "I wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart." As they walked into the sunset, Marcus reflected on how his life had changed. From invisible gardener to respected director, from rejected veteran to international speaker. He had discovered that the best revenge wasn't destroying those who had underestimated him. It was building something so extraordinary that their smallness became irrelevant. Patricia Whitmore had tried to break a man she judged by the color of his skin and the scars of war. But she ended up discovering that true strength doesn't come from titles or money. It comes from the ability to turn pain into purpose and prejudice into fuel to achieve unimaginable greatness. If this story has shown you that we should never judge anyone by our first impressions, let us know in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories that prove true strength comes from within, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.